Hi, my name's Beata Kubitz. I'm the Director of Communications and Policy for Travel Spirit, which is we do thinking about openness in mobility as a service, but I'm also the author of the annual survey of mobility as a service for Landor Links, which you may know as the publisher of Local Transport Today. It's actually the second annual survey of mobility as a service this year, so we've got some data from last year to compare it with. And it's a survey of people who work in the transport industry contacted through Landor Links networks and through social media. So it's a self-selecting survey, but it does give us a bit of a kind of temperature check for the field as a whole and how it's developing. It's also full of case studies and some analysis, which I'm hoping to share with you today. So, part of the context for the annual survey is about what people are doing, how people are travelling. And one of the important reports that was launched earlier this year was launched by Greg Marsden from the ITS in Leeds, which was the Commission on Travel Demand. And what did the Commission on Travel Demand found that people are travelling less. They're travelling less on every single metric. They're spending less time travelling. They're making fewer trips, and they're also spending less distance as well. And this isn't a blip. This has been happening since the 1990s, and maybe it explains why annually the DFT publishes a projection for road transport, which looks up into every year, but we never quite reach that projection. And so this is happening. It's quite hard to work out why it's happening. It was so puzzling to the DFT that they did a specific piece of research about young people and transport. And what they found was that young people are much less interested in car ownership. They are driving less. They are getting their driving licenses later. And to all intents and purposes, all the research that they are finding is that they're unlikely to own vehicles to the same extent as their previous cohorts. So we have a sort of peak car amongst baby boomers and then a lesser tendency to own and drive cars among the younger generations. They're also pretty kind of stressed. I mean, there is an economic argument for this lack of car ownership in younger generations. They are emerging from university with a lot of debt. They're going into jobs which are less secure. They have, the whole gig economy is arising as they are hitting the workforce. So they're kind of quite stressed. But they're also digital native. They have been doing that. They have only ever known the internet. They've never known not being able, dial up in email and all sorts of things that I remember in the dim and distance past. They have no concept. So they expect things that work digitally. And they also, because they're economically stressed, they want things that are great value, and they're pretty snippy if things aren't up to scratch for their hard-earned resources. So it's no coincidence that I've put Uber up on this screen. Uber is one of the resources which young people have taken to with alacrity. And last year, the last couple of years is the first time that Uber's actually dented the top 100 taxi companies' profit margins, but also it has increased the market for taxis overall. So there's a new consumer in town. And there's a car industry which since 2008 has been feeling pretty stressed and febrile itself because there was an enormous financial crash in 2008 which hit car sales pretty badly, and they've never really recovered. The markets are pretty slow, slightly declining. So the car industry and other transport industries are looking for ways of attracting the new consumer. Up there in the top right, we've got the Toyota Concept iRide, which is a concept car shown at a recent car show by Toyota, monikered "The future of transport, mass transit. The future of mass transit is personal. Fleets of autonomous vehicles, possibly a way of attracting new consumers." We've got the Greenwich autonomous shared vehicle, which was trialled in Greenwich. We've got the Arriva Click, which I don't know if anyone here has seen, which is a a bus service that runs over an area. It's ordered by app. You walk to a street corner and it drops you off at a street corner near where you want to go. So it's kind of like an on-demand transport system. We've got the advent of the mobike and the OFO, possibly the advent and the decline of the mobike and the OFO. Who knows? But that is a piece of transport infrastructure released into the wild, entirely managed by data. You only have a relationship with OFO and mobike via your phone and your bank account and actually riding their bikes. And we also have the other MAAS systems that are available. MAAS transport as another way of experimenting with trying to attract new consumers or out of cars or who are not taking up cars. So this is actually about the annual survey of mobility as a service, and how this fits into this sort of bigger transport and society piece. And we surveyed transport professionals in the UK, and we found that they were extremely excited about the advent of mobility as a service. 85% of them thought that it would be a fantastic thing for transport. So they're great. And we asked them what they kind of thought it was, because as everyone said, there are different models for mobility as a service. There's the car industry thinking it might be fleets of autonomous vehicles, and whereas the transport industry thinks it's an integrated multimodal system. And our survey respondents all thought it was about integration, journey planning, integrated ticketing and payment, and the key things in their system, in their vision of mobility as a service, was public transport, walking, cycling and taxis. So then we look at who's actually answered this survey, and it was, people who read Local Transport Today and follow me on Twitter. But those are, they're self-selecting. And the thing about a self-selecting audience is that they are people who are interested in the topic. So who is interested in the topic? Local authorities, transport authorities are interested in the topic. They're people who work with transport authorities like consultants, technology providers, people who are interested in providing a seamless integrated transport system. People who weren't interested in mobility as a service were public transport operators. If those people who are interested in mobility as a service think that it's going to be pinned around public transport operators, but public transport operators aren't actually interested in providing the core of their service, I think we have a little bit of an issue. And when I drilled down further into that very small number of public transport operators who responded to the survey, they were less enthusiastic about MAAS. They were concerned that it would just add another layer to their already stressed business, another set of things they have to do, additional costs, and they're not entirely sure that they see the business case. So that's one of the concerns from the survey. So then I sort of pulled the lens back a little bit wider to look at what else is happening in the transport sector as a whole. And this sort of vast plate of spaghetti is a drawing of the investments and partnerships and ownerships within the broader transport network. And it's centred around a person in the centre. This is your little individual who has a vast array of things that they could use to transport themselves. They've got apps, they've got Google Maps, they've got Apple Maps, they've got bus trackers, and you could use an app to unlock a mobike, you could use an app to get a taxi, get an Uber, you can use an app to get a train. So those things are all there, are all kind of swirling around. You can get in your car and drive the length, from Land's End to John O'Groats. That's another transport network that's available to you. And around the outside, to the left, the sort of of this screen, you can see that you've got a lot of the automotive industry lined up, and the way in which that they are investing and partnering with some of these new business models is really quite interesting. They're not bothered about the fact that, JLR, Jaguar Land Rover and Toyota are both investing in Uber. That's fine. Alphabet, Google and Apple, they're all into this marketplace. They're all crossing over, investing in different apps and different business models, different ways of being in touch with customers. And that's quite interesting. But then, you know, they are about the consumer in the UK spends about 100 billion a year on car driving, all aspects of motoring over the piece. They spend about less than 20 billion on public transport. So there is a little bit of an order of magnitude of difference here. But these are the public transport operators. And what are they doing? They're not doing this kind of, oh, let's try a different business model. Let's work with a different company. Let's have another go at the ways of contacting our customers. They're in this very linear relationship with their customer. Maybe they've got an app, but it's a sort of one-to-one relationship, and you will use our app, and otherwise, you know, you're going to have to use cash, I'm afraid. And so it's not. There are a few little oddities here and there. ComfortDelGro, which runs Metroline, is actually a Singaporean taxi company, which has done a deal with Uber over market share in Singapore. Transdev, which offers some services up where I live in the north of England, has invested in MAAS Global, which is the owner of the WIM app. So there are some things, and we'll see the the rail services who have got innovation funds. We may see some of those being used a little bit more interestingly, but I'm still looking for evidence for that. So this is quite an interesting thing, that we've got a sector which is very regulated down here. The public transport has understood regulation and services. Ben was talking about the way in which the business models in the public sector have been kind of constrained, and a sector which has had a completely different regulatory framework around it, and they're kind of butting up together at the moment. You know, the car and the automotive industry and banking and technology is getting into shared transport, but the public transport industry is staying quite separate at present. So one of the things about public transport that I just want to say very clearly, that it's not just about having an app. And customers aren't particularly happy with the apps. I'm on it. Customers aren't particularly happy with the apps that they're getting from public transport these days. If you kind of scroll through, as I do, App Annie, it's not a particularly happy scenario. So it's not just about an app, it's about different ways of having a business. It's about that cooperation. And there are different models for this cooperation. So we've got two quite different models here. The Next Bike has got a what they call platform agnostic approach. So Next Bike in Glasgow, it's a smart card. It has its own app, but you can also get a smart card that, if you don't have a bank account, allows you to unlock a Next Bike. In Amsterdam, the rules are that if you provide bike share in Amsterdam, then you have to be on the public app with 2 other bike share companies. So you don't have distribution issues and clogging like you do with some bike share schemes. In Cologne, you've got the bike share. Next Bike is fully integrated with the public transport card, and then there's Next Bike's own app. So it's kind of like wherever we go, we've got Next Bikes. Very shortly, we should have Next Bike, I'm looking at Chris here, in Birmingham, in the West Midlands, and it will be fully integrated with the WIM app at that point. And what's really interesting about that is that if you have a WIM app on your telephone, you can then access Next Bike anywhere the Next Bike exists, from Cardiff to Glasgow to Amsterdam, with your WIM app. So you suddenly get this kind of network bleed of usage from owning one particular app that's networked with this sort of platform agnostic model. Uber, completely different business model. We've aggregated huge numbers of customers if we're at Uber, and we've sold them great taxi fares, and we've given them really good customer service. Now what do? We sell them bike share, jump bikes in Berlin, in San Francisco. We sell them peer-to-peer car sharing, car hiring, and we're even integrating a public transport ticketing layer in the US at the moment. There's no sign of that here. So you've got 2 different business models of what's happening in the private sector. So this brings me back to my work for Travel Spirit, which is much more about, you've got these different models. You've got the public sector thinking that it wants an integrated ticketing and travel planning approach, and it's a very kind of like, we want to plan our cities. You've got the private sector doing all sorts of crazy, in some cases, things, and interesting and unique ways of engaging with customers. And I think that one of the ways that we can kind of unify this and maybe regulate transport better is through demanding that there is openness in the transport APIs, and that lots of different ways are able to bring together customer-friendly ways of accessing, paying for transport. And have I run out of time now? Right, thank you very much. I'm Beata Ku. If you want to read the annual survey of Mobility as a Service, go to the Landor Links website and come see us at Travel Spirit as well. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Beata. Do you know what? That was really interesting. And what I found very stimulating was that infographic on actually the disruptors coming in to this market and what they're doing and how they're investing and how it is subtly changing, but it is subtly changing in a big, big way. And I do totally agree that actually the transport operators do need, in my opinion, to pull themselves up and have a look at this, because they could end up being Kodak companies in the not too distant future, unless they can start to react to some of these influences coming in and the money coming in, the new money coming in from that left-hand side. So I really like that diagram a lot. Thank you very much indeed.